What if the secret to defeating an immortal alien race wasn't superior technology, advanced weaponry, or even military strategy, but something as simple and fundamentally human as patience? Today's story follows Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who discovers that sometimes the greatest weakness of those who live forever is their inability to understand those who don't. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the cold laboratory window, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The view from the Colorado Research Institute never failed to calm her nerves, especially during the early morning hours when the world felt peaceful and full of possibilities. She had been working at the facility for 3 years now, studying extremophile bacteria from the deepest ocean trenches, organisms that could survive in conditions that would kill most life forms instantly. Sarah was 32 years old, with short black hair that she kept practical and out of the way, and dark eyes that missed nothing when she peered through a microscope. Her colleagues often joked that she could spot anomalies in bacterial cultures that would take others hours to notice. She had earned her doctorate from Stanford at 26 and had already published papers that were reshaping how scientists understood life in extreme environments. The laboratory was her sanctuary, a place where everything made sense according to the laws of biology and chemistry. She understood the delicate balance of cellular structures, the precise mechanisms that allowed life to flourish against impossible odds. What she didn't understand, and what kept her awake some nights, was why she felt so restless lately, as if she were waiting for something important to happen without knowing what it might be. The morning routine was always the same. Sarah would arrive at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else, and spend the quiet time reviewing her research data from the previous day. She would prepare fresh culture samples, calibrate her equipment, and plan the day's experiments. The work was meticulous and required absolute attention to detail, but Sarah found the precision soothing rather than tedious. Today felt different from the moment she walked through the laboratory doors. The air seemed charged with an energy she couldn't identify, and her normally steady hands trembled slightly as she handled the delicate glass instruments. She told herself it was probably just caffeine withdrawal, since she had forgotten to stop for coffee on her way in, but deep down she knew it was something else entirely. The first sign that this would not be an ordinary day came when her computer began displaying readings that made no scientific sense. Sarah was analyzing samples of microorganisms collected from a meteorite that had crashed in the Montana wilderness 6 months earlier. The space rock had been relatively small, about the size of a basketball, but it contained bacterial life forms unlike anything found on Earth. The organisms were fascinating because they seemed to possess cellular repair mechanisms that were impossibly efficient. While normal bacteria would die within hours when exposed to extreme radiation, these alien microbes actually thrived in conditions that should have destroyed them instantly. Sarah had been studying their DNA structure for weeks, trying to understand how they achieved such remarkable resilience. The computer screen showed cellular division rates that were occurring far too rapidly for the available nutrients in the culture medium. According to her calculations, the bacteria should have exhausted their food supply days ago, yet they continued to multiply at an exponential rate. Even more puzzling, individual cells that she had damaged deliberately with targeted radiation were repairing themselves within minutes, rather than the hours or days such healing should require. Sarah ran the tests 3 more times, convinced that her equipment was malfunctioning. Each time the results were identical and equally impossible. The alien bacteria were not just surviving in conditions that would kill Earth organisms, they were actually becoming stronger and more numerous. It was as if they had discovered a way to violate the fundamental laws of thermodynamics by creating energy from nothing. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the sky outside beginning to change color. What had started as a normal blue morning was gradually shifting to a pale green hue that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The change was subtle at first, like a filter being slowly adjusted on a camera, but it became more pronounced as the hours passed. The first person to notice the atmospheric anomaly was Dr. Marcus Webb, Sarah's research partner and the closest thing she had to a friend at the institute. Marcus was a tall, lanky man in his 40s with graying brown hair and a perpetually worried expression that made him look older than his years. He had been studying atmospheric chemistry for most of his career, and prided himself on being able to predict weather patterns days in advance. Marcus burst into the laboratory just after 10 in the morning, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, gesturing frantically toward the windows. "Something's happening to the atmosphere. The spectral analysis is showing compounds that shouldn't exist in our air." Sarah looked up from her microscope for the first time in hours and immediately noticed the strange green tint to the daylight. "How long has it been like this?" she asked, feeling a chill run down her spine despite the warm temperature in the lab. "About 2 hours," Marcus replied, pulling up data on his tablet. "The change started gradually around 8 this morning and it's been intensifying ever since. I've been monitoring air quality sensors across the entire region and they're all showing the same thing. There are atmospheric particles present that don't match any known compounds." Sarah felt her stomach drop as a terrible possibility occurred to her. She turned back to her computer and pulled up the data from her bacterial cultures. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. The alien microorganisms had begun their impossible growth spurt at almost exactly the same time the atmospheric changes started. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think my bacteria samples might be connected to what's happening outside." She showed him the cellular division data and the timeline of her observations. Marcus studied the information for several minutes, his expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. As an atmospheric chemist, he understood the implications better than most people would. "If these organisms are releasing compounds into the air," he said slowly, "and if they're multiplying at the rate your data suggests, then we could be looking at a planet-wide atmospheric transformation. But that's impossible. A few bacteria in a laboratory culture can't affect the entire atmosphere." Sarah pulled up satellite imagery on her computer, linking to databases that tracked atmospheric conditions across the globe. What she saw made her blood run cold. The green atmospheric disturbance wasn't limited to Colorado. Similar changes were being reported from every location on Earth where meteorite fragments had been recovered and studied over the past year. There had been 17 meteorite impacts in various countries during the last 12 months. Each one had been relatively small and had caused no damage beyond creating small craters. Space agencies around the world had collected samples and distributed them to research facilities for analysis. Sarah's institute had received fragments from 3 different impact sites. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random series of meteorite strikes. It was a coordinated seeding operation. Someone or something had deliberately sent these objects to Earth, knowing that human scientists would collect and study them. The bacterial organisms weren't just surviving in laboratory conditions. They were designed to thrive and spread once they reached their target planet. "We need to contact the CDC immediately," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. "If these organisms are spreading into the atmosphere, people could start getting sick very quickly." But when she tried to make the call, her phone displayed a message she had never seen before. "Network access restricted. Please stand by for official communication." Marcus tried his phone with the same result. The laboratory's internet connection was also blocked, showing only a blank screen with a spinning loading symbol. Sarah felt the first real surge of fear since the morning began. Someone with significant authority had cut off their communications, which meant that whatever was happening was already known to people in very high places. The question was whether those people were trying to help or to cover up something much worse. The answer came 20 minutes later when 4 black SUVs pulled up to the research institute. Men and women in dark suits emerged from the vehicles and walked purposefully toward the building's main entrance. They moved with the precise coordination of people who had done this many times before, and Sarah noticed that several of them were carrying equipment cases that looked both expensive and highly technical. Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, the institute's director, appeared in the laboratory doorway looking pale and shaken. She was a woman in her 60s who had spent her entire career in academic research and had never dealt with anything more threatening than budget meetings and peer review committees. "Sarah, Marcus," she said in a voice that was trying hard to remain calm, "there are some people here who need to speak with you about your meteorite research. They say it's a matter of national security." The lead agent was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She introduced herself as Agent Rebecca Torres from a government agency that Sarah had never heard of. The badge she showed looked official, but the organization name was just a string of initials that meant nothing to anyone outside of very classified circles. Dr. Chen, Agent Torres said, "We understand you've been studying organisms recovered from meteorite samples. We need you to tell us everything you've observed about their behavior and growth patterns." Sarah felt torn between scientific curiosity and growing concern about the larger situation. "Before I share my research data," she said carefully, "I need to understand what's happening. Are people in danger? Is this some kind of biological weapon?" Agent Torres exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "What we can tell you is that similar atmospheric changes are occurring worldwide. Research facilities in 17 countries have reported the same phenomena you've observed here. We're dealing with a coordinated event that appears to have been planned and executed by an intelligence that we don't yet understand." The word intelligence sent a chill through Sarah's body. She had been thinking of the bacteria as remarkable but mindless organisms following their biological programming. The idea that they might be part of a deliberate plan created by thinking beings was far more terrifying. "You're talking about aliens," Marcus said quietly. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "It wasn't a question." Agent Torres nodded grimly. "The evidence strongly suggests that Earth has been systematically seeded with organisms designed to alter our atmosphere. The coordination required for 17 simultaneous meteorite strikes, each carrying identical bacterial payloads, indicates a level of planning and technology far beyond our current capabilities." Sarah's scientific mind raced through the implications. If they wanted to poison our atmosphere or kill us directly, they could have used toxins or viruses that would work much faster. But these bacteria seem designed for long-term environmental modification. They're changing the air composition gradually, which suggests that they want the planet, not necessarily to eliminate humans immediately, Agent Torres finished. "Our xenobiology consultants believe this might be a terraforming operation designed to make Earth's atmosphere more suitable for a different type of life form." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the enormity of what they were discussing. Sarah felt her worldview shifting fundamentally as she realized that humanity was not alone in the universe and that their first contact with alien intelligence was not the peaceful scientific exchange that researchers had always hoped for. "How long do we have?" she asked. Agent Torres consulted a tablet that one of her colleagues handed her. "Based on current rates of atmospheric change, our models suggest that Earth's air will become unbreathable for humans within 6 to 8 months. But that assumes the bacterial growth continues at its present rate without any acceleration." Sarah pulled up her laboratory data again and studied the growth curves with new urgency. "The multiplication rate isn't constant," she said, pointing to specific time intervals on her charts. "It's following an exponential curve that's actually accelerating. If this pattern continues, we might have weeks rather than months." The agents spent the next hour reviewing all of Sarah's research data and taking samples of the bacterial cultures for their own analysis. They were thorough and professional, but Sarah could see the tension in their movements and the concern in their eyes. These were people who dealt with national security threats for a living, and they were clearly worried about something beyond just the atmospheric changes. Finally, Agent Torres closed her briefcase and looked directly at Sarah. "Dr. Chen, we need to ask you to come with us. Your expertise in extremophile biology makes you invaluable for understanding these organisms and potentially finding a way to stop them. We have a classified research facility where you'll be working with the best scientists in the world on this problem." Sarah looked around the laboratory that had been her home for 3 years. Her neat rows of equipment, her carefully organized sample collections, her years of research notes. Everything that represented her normal life was about to be left behind. But she knew that normal life was over for everyone on Earth, whether they realized it yet or not. "What about the other researchers here?" she asked. "They'll need to be evacuated if the atmospheric changes continue." "Evacuation protocols are already being implemented at facilities worldwide," Agent Torres replied. "Most of the population doesn't know what's happening yet, but that will change very soon. The atmospheric effects will become visible to everyone within the next few days." Sarah gathered her most important research files and a few personal items from her office. As she walked through the Institute's corridors for what might be the last time, She tried to process the fact that she was leaving behind not just her job, but potentially the entire world as she had known it. The government facility was located in an underground complex beneath the Nevada desert, built into natural rock formations that provided both secrecy and protection from various types of attacks. Sarah found herself in a situation that felt like science fiction made real, working alongside experts in fields she had only read about in academic journals. The team included microbiologists, atmospheric scientists, physicists, and specialists in theoretical xenobiology. Dr. James Patterson, the project leader, was a man in his 50s who had spent his career studying the possibility of extraterrestrial life. He had the intensity of someone who had suddenly seen his life's work become the most important research on Earth. The organisms you've been studying represent the most sophisticated biological engineering we've ever encountered, Dr. Patterson explained during Sarah's first briefing. They're not just bacteria, they're biological machines designed to perform specific atmospheric modification tasks with extraordinary efficiency. Sarah spent her first week at the facility analyzing bacterial samples from all 17 meteorite impact sites. Each sample was identical down to the genetic level, confirming that this was indeed a coordinated operation rather than a series of random cosmic events. The organisms showed capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about what was possible in biological systems. The bacteria could survive in complete vacuum, withstand radiation levels that would sterilize normal organic matter, and reproduce using atmospheric nitrogen and carbon dioxide as their primary energy sources. They were essentially living terraforming machines, designed to gradually convert Earth's oxygen-rich atmosphere into something that would support different types of life. But the most disturbing discovery came when Sarah began studying their cellular communication systems. The organisms weren't just following pre-programmed biological instructions. They were actively communicating with each other across vast distances, coordinating their activities on a planetary scale. The atmospheric changes weren't random. They were following a specific pattern that suggested intelligent oversight. "They're reporting back to something," Sarah told Dr. Patterson during their daily research meeting. "The communication signals are too complex and too coordinated to be simple chemical responses. There's an intelligence directing this operation, and it's monitoring our progress." Dr. Patterson pulled up satellite data showing the current state of atmospheric modification across the globe. The changes were accelerating exactly as Sarah's models had predicted, but there were also new developments that hadn't been anticipated. In several regions, the bacterial clouds were beginning to form visible structures in the atmosphere, geometric patterns that serve no obvious biological function. "We think those patterns might be communication arrays," Dr. Patterson said. "The aliens, and at this point we have to call them that, appear to be building infrastructure in our atmosphere. They're not just changing the air composition, they're establishing some kind of network." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. They're preparing for something. The atmospheric changes aren't the end goal, they're the first phase of a larger operation. Over the following days, Sarah's fears were confirmed as more disturbing evidence emerged. The bacterial organisms were not only modifying Earth's atmosphere, they were also beginning to construct physical structures. Microscopic analysis revealed that the bacteria could link together to form larger, more complex assemblies that functioned like biological technology. The implications were staggering. An alien intelligence had seeded Earth with organisms that were simultaneously terraforming the planet and building the infrastructure for what appeared to be an invasion. The most terrifying aspect was the timeline. The bacteria were working faster than anyone had initially calculated, and the window for human response was closing rapidly. But Sarah had noticed something in her data that none of the other researchers had caught, something that might represent humanity's only chance for survival. The bacterial organisms, for all their sophistication, showed one crucial weakness that their creators had apparently not anticipated. They were designed to be immortal, capable of surviving indefinitely in any environment, but that immortality made them vulnerable in a way that mortal organisms were not. The bacteria never died, which meant they never evolved. They were locked into their original programming and couldn't adapt to unexpected challenges. Sarah realized that while humans were mortal and fragile compared to these alien organisms, their mortality gave them something the bacteria lacked: the ability to change, to learn, and to develop new strategies when old ones failed. More importantly, Sarah began to understand that the aliens themselves might share this weakness. If they had achieved true immortality, they might have lost the capacity for the kind of patient, gradual adaptation that had allowed humans to survive and thrive on Earth for thousands of years. They were thinking in terms of immediate, overwhelming success because they had forgotten what it meant to struggle against difficult odds. As Sarah prepared to share her theory with the research team, she felt a strange sense of hope beginning to grow alongside her fear. The aliens might have superior technology and what appeared to be unlimited time, but they were about to learn something important about human nature. Sometimes the greatest weapon against an immortal enemy was the patience and persistence that came from knowing that life was temporary and precious. The battle for Earth was just beginning, and Sarah suspected that the real conflict would not be won through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the very human ability to endure, adapt, and outlast any challenge through sheer determination. The aliens had perfected immortality, but they were about to discover that they couldn't outlast human patience. The breakthrough came during Sarah's 4th week at the Nevada facility, when she discovered something that changed everything the research team thought they knew about their alien adversaries. While analyzing bacterial samples under an electron microscope, she noticed cellular structures that defied conventional biological understanding. The organisms possessed what appeared to be crystalline memory cores, embedded within their genetic material, data storage systems more advanced than anything human technology had achieved. Dr. Patterson gathered the entire research team when Sarah announced her findings. The main laboratory buzzed with excited conversation, as scientists from different disciplines tried to comprehend the implications of what she had discovered. Sarah projected her microscopic images onto the large screen at the front of the room, highlighting the intricate crystalline formations that existed within each bacterial cell. "These aren't just biological organisms," Sarah explained to the assembled researchers. "They're living computers, each one capable of storing and processing vast amounts of information. The crystalline structures appear to contain detailed blueprints for atmospheric modification, construction protocols for building larger structures, and what looks like comprehensive data about Earth's environmental systems." Dr. Lisa Zhang, the team's quantum physicist, leaned forward with intense interest. "If each bacterium contains that much information, and there are trillions of them worldwide, we're looking at a distributed computing network with processing power that exceeds every computer on Earth combined." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I think we're dealing with. The aliens didn't just send terraforming bacteria, they sent a living supercomputer designed to analyze our planet and coordinate the most efficient transformation strategy possible." The revelation explained why the atmospheric changes had been proceeding with such mathematical precision. The bacterial network was continuously monitoring environmental conditions, adjusting its growth patterns and chemical output to optimize the terraforming process. It was learning about Earth's systems in real time and adapting its strategy accordingly. But Sarah's most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Hidden within the crystalline memory cores were data fragments that appeared to be historical records from other worlds. The bacteria carried information about previous terraforming operations, detailed documentation of dozens of other planets that had undergone similar atmospheric transformations. Dr. Patterson worked with the team's linguistics expert, Dr. Maria Santos, to attempt translation of the alien data. The mathematical and scientific portions were relatively straightforward to decode, but the historical records contained information that painted a terrifying picture of the aliens' long-term goals and methods. According to these records, Dr. Santos reported during their next briefing, the aliens have been conducting terraforming operations for over 50,000 years. They've successfully converted 43 different worlds, and in every case, the native intelligent species was either eliminated or enslaved. Sarah felt sick as she realized the full scope of what Earth was facing. This wasn't humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, it was just their turn to be processed by a civilization that had perfected the art of planetary conquest through biological warfare. The historical data revealed the aliens' standard operating procedure. They would seed a target world with terraforming bacteria, monitor the planet's response and the native species' attempts at resistance, then arrive in person once the atmosphere had been sufficiently modified. The entire process typically took between 6 months and 2 years, depending on the complexity of the planet's ecosystem. But as Sarah studied the historical records more carefully, she began to notice patterns that gave her hope. The alien campaigns were successful, but they all followed identical procedures with minimal variation. The aliens approached each new world using exactly the same strategies that had worked on previous planets: apparently seeing no need to modify their proven methods. "They're overconfident," Sarah told Dr. Patterson during a private meeting in his office. "Look at these records. Every terraforming operation is nearly identical. They send the bacteria, monitor the results, then arrive with their invasion fleet. They've been so successful for so long that they've stopped expecting significant resistance." Dr. Patterson studied the data Sarah had compiled. "What are you thinking?" Sarah pulled up comparative analyses she had been working on for days. "I think they've made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature. All of their previous conquests involved species that tried to fight the bacteria directly or evacuate their planets when the atmospheric changes began. But humans have a different approach to impossible problems." She showed Dr. Patterson historical examples of human persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. The siege of Leningrad during World War II, where people survived for nearly 3 years under conditions that should have been fatal. Antarctic explorers who endured months of isolation and extreme conditions through careful planning and sheer determination. Deep-sea researchers who spent weeks in environments as hostile as outer space. Humans specialize in enduring situations that other species would consider hopeless, Sarah continued. "We've evolved to be patient, to plan for long-term survival, and to find ways to adapt to environments that should kill us. The aliens are immortal, which means they think in terms of immediate, overwhelming victory. They don't understand persistence the way we do." Dr. Patterson was beginning to see where Sarah's reasoning was leading. "You think we can outlast them?" "I think we can do something they've never encountered before," Sarah replied. "Instead of trying to fight the bacteria or escape from Earth, we can learn to live with the atmospheric changes. If we can adapt to their terraforming process, we might be able to survive long enough to turn their own weapons against them." The idea was radical and dangerous, but it was also the first plan anyone had proposed that offered any hope of long-term human survival. Sarah's proposal was to study the bacterial network's programming in detail, learn how it functioned, and find ways to subtly influence its behavior, rather than trying to destroy it outright. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked with the team's computer specialists to develop interfaces that could communicate with the bacterial network. The process was incredibly complex because they were essentially trying to hack a biological computer system using electronic technology. Progress was slow, but gradually they began to understand how the bacteria received and processed information. The breakthrough came when Dr. Zhang discovered that the crystalline memory cores responded to specific electromagnetic frequencies. By modulating radio signals at precise wavelengths, they could access the bacteria's data storage systems and even send limited commands to individual organisms. "It's like learning to speak their language," Dr. Zhang explained to Sarah as they tested their communication interface. "The bacteria are designed to receive instructions from their creators, but those instructions come in the form of electromagnetic signals. If we can replicate the correct signal patterns, we might be able to give them new commands." Sarah felt a surge of excitement as she realized the implications. If we can communicate with them, we might be able to reprogram their terraforming protocols. Instead of converting Earth's atmosphere to something that supports alien life, we could modify their instructions to create an atmosphere that supports both human and alien physiology. The work was painstaking and required absolute precision. Any mistakes in their signal patterns could alert the bacterial network to their interference, potentially triggering defensive responses that could accelerate the terraforming process, or even release toxins specifically designed to eliminate human life. But Sarah's team had advantages that the aliens had not anticipated. Human scientists were accustomed to working with incomplete information, making educated guesses, and adapting their strategies when experiments failed. The bacterial network, despite its sophisticated programming, was designed to follow predetermined protocols rather than to innovate or adapt to unexpected situations. After months of careful work, Sarah's team successfully established limited communication with several bacterial colonies. They discovered that the organisms were not actually intelligent in the conventional sense, but rather were following extremely complex programming that simulated intelligence. The real alien minds were somewhere else, monitoring the terraforming process, but not directly controlling every aspect of it. "They're overseeing the operation from a distance," Sarah explained to the assembled research team. "The bacteria are like autonomous robots following their programming, but they're designed to report back to their controllers periodically. If we can intercept and modify those reports, we might be able to mislead the aliens about our planet's status." Dr. Patterson was intrigued by the possibility. What kind of false information could we send? Sarah had been thinking about this question for weeks. We could make it appear that Earth's atmosphere is being modified more slowly than it actually is, buying us additional time to develop countermeasures. Or we could make it seem like the bacterial network is encountering unexpected resistance from Earth's ecosystem, suggesting that this planet requires different terraforming protocols. The plan they eventually developed was both elegant and audacious. Sarah's team would gradually reprogram portions of the bacterial network to slow down the atmospheric transformation while simultaneously sending false reports to the alien controllers, indicating that the terraforming process was proceeding according to schedule. The key to success was patience and careful timing. They couldn't make dramatic changes that would be immediately obvious to the aliens. Instead, they had to work slowly and subtly, making thousands of tiny modifications that would accumulate over time to significantly alter the terraforming timeline. Sarah found herself working 18-hour days, carefully monitoring bacterial colonies around the world and making minute adjustments to their programming. The work was exhausting and required constant vigilance, but gradually she began to see results. Atmospheric modification rates started to slow in specific regions where her team had successfully interfaced with the bacterial networks. But their success also brought new dangers. As the terraforming process deviated from its expected timeline, the alien controllers began sending more frequent monitoring signals to their bacterial networks. Sarah's team had to work even more carefully to avoid detection while maintaining their gradual sabotage of the operation. The real test of their strategy came 6 months after they had begun their interference campaign. According to the original alien timeline, Earth's atmosphere should have been approaching the final stages of transformation. Instead, the process was barely halfway complete, and the bacterial networks were reporting increasing resistance from native ecological systems. Sarah monitored alien communications with growing anticipation, waiting to see how the immortal beings would respond to their first significant setback in thousands of years. The response, when it came, revealed something crucial about the alien mindset that would determine the ultimate fate of both species. Rather than adapting their strategy or investigating the source of the unexpected resistance, the aliens simply increased the intensity of their terraforming efforts. They sent additional bacterial payloads to Earth and attempted to accelerate the atmospheric modification process through brute force rather than tactical adjustment. They don't know how to handle failure, Sarah told Dr. Patterson as they analyzed the alien response. Their immortality has made them inflexible. When their standard procedures don't work, they just try harder with the same approach, instead of developing new strategies. The alien escalation provided Sarah's team with the opportunity they had been hoping for. The additional bacterial payloads were designed to integrate with the existing networks, which meant they were vulnerable to the same reprogramming techniques Sarah had developed. Instead of accelerating the terraforming process, the new bacteria became additional resources that Sarah could turn against their original purpose. But the aliens had one more surprise in store. Hidden within the new bacterial payloads were monitoring organisms specifically designed to detect interference with the terraforming networks. These biological surveillance systems were far more sophisticated than anything Sarah's team had encountered before, and they posed a serious threat to the entire human resistance operation. Dr. Chen was the first to detect the monitoring organisms during a routine analysis of newly arrived bacterial samples. "These aren't terraforming bacteria," she told Sarah urgently. "They're designed to observe and report on the other organisms. If they detect our interference, they'll send an immediate alert to the alien controllers." Sarah realized that the next phase of their conflict with the aliens would require even more patience and cunning than anything they had attempted so far. The immortal beings might be inflexible in their strategic thinking, but they were not stupid. They had recognized that something was interfering with their terraforming operation, and they were taking steps to identify and eliminate the source of resistance. The war for Earth was entering a new phase, one that would test the limits of human persistence against alien technology that had perfected the art of planetary conquest over 50 millennia. Sarah knew that their only advantage lay in their willingness to endure, adapt, and continue fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. The aliens had perfected immortality, but they were about to learn that sometimes the greatest weapon against an eternal enemy was the simple human refusal to give up. The monitoring organisms proved to be both Sarah's greatest challenge and her most valuable discovery. While Dr. Zhang worked frantically to develop countermeasures against the biological surveillance systems, Sarah made a startling realization about their true purpose. The monitors weren't just designed to detect interference with the terraforming process. They were actually recording detailed behavioral data about human resistance strategies. Sarah spent sleepless nights analyzing the monitor's data collection patterns, and what she found chilled her to the bone. The aliens weren't just trying to stop human interference with their terraforming operation. They were studying human problem-solving methods, learning how Earth's dominant species approached impossible challenges. This wasn't standard procedure from their previous conquests. It was something new. They're treating us differently than the other 43 species they've conquered, Sarah explained to Dr. Patterson during an emergency meeting. According to their historical records, no other civilization managed to interfere with the bacterial networks. We've done something that's never happened before in 50,000 years of alien expansion. Dr. Patterson looked exhausted after months of coordinating the global resistance effort. Is that good news or bad news? Sarah had been wrestling with that question herself. Both. The good news is that we've proven human methods can be effective against their technology. The bad news is that we've gotten their attention in a way that no other species ever has. They're adapting their strategy specifically to counter human persistence. The evidence was mounting that the aliens were taking unprecedented steps to understand and defeat human resistance. Surveillance data showed that they were extending their timeline for Earth's conquest, apparently willing to invest additional resources to study their opponents rather than simply overwhelming them with superior firepower. But Sarah realized that the aliens' curiosity about human nature might also be their weakness. Their immortality had made them supremely confident in their existing methods, but encountering effective resistance for the first time in millennia had forced them to do something they were fundamentally unprepared for. They were learning. The problem is that learning requires admitting you don't know everything, Sarah told her team during their daily briefing. For immortal beings who have perfected planetary conquest, acknowledging that they need to change their approach is probably more difficult than we can imagine. Dr. Zhang had made progress in developing techniques to confuse the monitoring organisms, but her success revealed another layer of the aliens' response. Instead of simply sending more monitors, they had begun deploying what appeared to be decision-making organisms, bacteria that could analyze situations and modify their own programming in real time. It's like they're trying to make their biological computers more human, Dr. Zhang observed. They're giving them the ability to adapt and innovate, which means they're abandoning the very immortal perfection that made them successful in the first place. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she realized what this meant. They're trying to beat us by becoming more like us. But that's exactly the wrong approach. Human adaptability works because it's backed by human intuition, emotion, and our willingness to take risks. They can't just copy our flexibility without understanding what drives it. The next phase of Sarah's plan was her most audacious yet. Instead of trying to hide their interference with the bacterial networks, she proposed that they openly communicate with the alien controllers. If the aliens were studying human behavior, Sarah wanted to give them a lesson in human psychology that they would never forget. "We're going to negotiate with them," Sarah announced to the stunned research team. Not for surrender or compromise, but to demonstrate something they've never encountered before: human stubbornness taken to its logical extreme. Dr. Patterson was skeptical. "What makes you think immortal beings who have conquered dozens of worlds will be interested in negotiating with us?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Because we're the first species that's lasted this long against them. Their curiosity about us is stronger than their desire for immediate victory. They want to understand what makes us different, and I'm going to show them exactly what human patience looks like when it's applied strategically." The communication interface Sarah's team had developed for reprogramming bacteria could also be used to send messages directly to the alien controllers. Sarah crafted her first transmission carefully, knowing that it would set the tone for everything that followed. "To the beings orchestrating the terraforming of Earth," her message began. "We are the humans of this world, and we wish to discuss the terms of our coexistence. We understand you have conquered many worlds before ours, but we believe you have not encountered a species quite like humanity. We propose a test of patience, you against us, to determine who has the greater claim to this planet. The response came 3 days later, transmitted through the bacterial networks in a complex pattern of electromagnetic signals that took hours to decode. The alien message was brief but revealing. Your species shows unusual persistence. Explain your proposal. Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized that her gamble had worked. The aliens were intrigued enough to engage in communication, rather than simply escalating their military response. For the first time in their 50,000-year expansion, they had encountered a species that wanted to negotiate from a position of apparent weakness. We propose a contest of endurance, Sarah transmitted back. You have immortality and advanced technology. We have determination and the willingness to outlast any challenge. Stop your terraforming process for 1 Earth year. During that time, we will demonstrate human persistence by accomplishing something you believe to be impossible. If we succeed, you withdraw from our world. If we fail, we will cease all resistance to your conquest. The alien response took a full week to arrive, suggesting that they were debating among themselves about how to handle this unprecedented situation. When their message finally came through, it contained both intrigue and skepticism. Define the impossible task you propose to attempt. Sarah had been preparing for this question since she first conceived of the negotiation strategy. Her answer would demonstrate the fundamental difference between immortal and mortal thinking. We will teach your bacterial networks to evolve. The silence that followed this transmission lasted for 3 weeks. Sarah spent that time preparing for the most complex biological engineering project ever attempted, knowing that the fate of humanity depended on her ability to accomplish something that violated the aliens' most basic assumptions about how life functioned. Evolution required death and reproduction across generations, concepts that immortal beings had long since moved beyond. Their bacterial networks were designed to be perfect and unchanging, locked into their original programming for eternity. The idea that these organisms could be taught to evolve was fundamentally incompatible with alien philosophy. But Sarah understood something about evolution that the aliens had forgotten. It wasn't just about random mutations and natural selection. It was about adaptation under pressure, the willingness to change when change was necessary for survival. Humans had been evolving not just biologically but culturally and technologically for thousands of years, driven by their mortality to constantly improve and adapt. When the aliens finally responded, their message contained what Sarah interpreted as bemused curiosity. Evolution requires imperfection and eventual death. Our organisms are designed to be immortal and flawless. Your proposed task is indeed impossible by the laws of biology. Sarah's reply was immediate. The laws of biology as you understand them. Human science has learned that life finds ways to exceed all expectations. We accept your acknowledgement that this task is impossible. Do you accept our challenge to attempt it anyway? The alien response came quickly this time. We accept. You have 1 Earth year to demonstrate bacterial evolution. During this period, terraforming operations will be suspended, but not reversed. Our monitoring will continue. Failure will result in immediate completion of planetary conversion. Sarah felt the weight of an entire species' future settling on her shoulders as she began the most important work of her life. She had 1 year to accomplish something that alien science considered impossible, using only human determination, and the knowledge that failure meant the end of human civilization. The key insight came from studying the monitoring organisms that the aliens had deployed to observe human behavior. These bacteria had been designed with limited adaptive capabilities to better understand their targets. Sarah realized that the aliens had already taken the first step toward evolution without recognizing it. They had created organisms that could learn. Working with her entire team, Sarah began a careful process of introducing controlled stresses to bacterial colonies while monitoring their responses. Instead of trying to force evolution through genetic manipulation, they created environments that rewarded adaptability and punished rigidity. The process was painstakingly slow. Bacteria that had been designed for immortal perfection were resistant to any form of change. But Sarah's team had learned patience during their months of fighting the terraforming process. They applied stress gradually, allowed time for adaptation, and celebrated tiny improvements that accumulated over weeks and months. Dr. Zhang made the first breakthrough when she observed bacterial colonies beginning to modify their own crystalline memory cores in response to environmental challenges. "They're not just adapting their behavior," she told Sarah excitedly. "They're actually rewriting their own programming to become more effective." Sarah felt a thrill of vindication as she realized that her theory was correct. The aliens' pursuit of immortal perfection had made them forget that life's greatest strength came from its willingness to change and improve. By teaching their bacteria to evolve, she was demonstrating the fundamental advantage that mortal species held over immortal ones. As the months passed, Sarah's bacterial colonies began showing increasingly sophisticated adaptive behaviors. They developed new methods for processing atmospheric chemicals, created more efficient communication networks, and even began showing primitive forms of cooperation that hadn't been programmed into their original designs. The alien monitoring systems observed every step of this process, transmitting detailed reports back to their controllers. Sarah could only imagine the consternation these reports must be causing among beings who had built their entire civilization on the premise that perfection could be achieved and maintained indefinitely. With 2 months remaining in their agreed time frame, Sarah made a discovery that changed her understanding of the entire conflict. While analyzing communication patterns between evolved bacterial colonies, she detected signals that weren't part of the standard bacterial network. The evolved organisms were trying to communicate directly with their alien creators, sending messages that roughly translated to requests for new instructions. "They're asking their makers for permission to continue evolving," Dr. Zhang observed. "The bacteria have developed enough independence to recognize that they're changing, but they're still programmed to seek approval from higher authority." Sarah realized that this was her moment of ultimate victory. The aliens had demanded proof that bacterial evolution was possible, and she had provided it. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that evolution was inherently destabilizing to any system built on the assumption of unchanging perfection. The alien response to their evolved bacteria's communications revealed the depth of Sarah's success. Instead of sending new instructions, the alien controllers transmitted what could only be described as confusion and concern. For the first time in 50,000 years, they were dealing with something that didn't fit their established patterns of control and domination. Sarah composed her final transmission to the alien controllers with careful attention to every word. "The bacterial evolution you requested has been achieved. Your organisms now possess the capacity for autonomous adaptation and improvement. They are no longer limited by their original programming and will continue to evolve indefinitely. As agreed, we have accomplished the impossible. We now request that you honor your commitment to withdraw from Earth." The alien response, when it came, contained something Sarah had never expected to hear from immortal conquerors: uncertainty. "The implications of bacterial evolution require extensive analysis. The organisms you have modified may pose risks to our established systems. We must reconsider our approach to this planet." Sarah smiled, as she realized that her strategy had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. By teaching the aliens' own organisms to evolve, she had introduced an element of unpredictability into their perfectly ordered system. The immortal beings who had spent millennia perfecting their conquest techniques were now faced with biological systems that could change in ways they couldn't predict or control. The final alien transmission arrived exactly 1 year after their original agreement. "Your species has demonstrated capabilities that require reassessment of our expansion protocols. Earth will be designated as a study zone rather than a conquest target. Terraforming operations will be permanently suspended while we analyze the implications of evolutionary adaptation for our civilization." Dr. Patterson found Sarah in the laboratory where she had first discovered the aliens' crystalline memory cores. She was staring through the microscope at bacterial colonies that were now fundamentally different from the organisms that had first threatened Earth's atmosphere. "They're withdrawing," Dr. Patterson said quietly. "Satellite imagery shows alien ships leaving Earth's orbital space. The atmospheric composition is stabilizing at levels that can support both human and modified bacterial life." Sarah looked up from the microscope with tears in her eyes. "We did it. We outlasted beings who had perfected immortality by showing them something they had forgotten, that the willingness to change and grow is more powerful than the desire to remain perfect forever." The bacterial colonies that remained on Earth continued to evolve under human guidance, eventually becoming beneficial organisms that helped restore atmospheric balance while providing new insights into biological adaptation. The aliens never returned to Earth, but their periodic transmissions suggested that they were struggling to incorporate the concept of controlled evolution into their own immortal society. Sarah often wondered about the long-term implications of their encounter with humanity. The aliens had conquered 43 worlds using the same unchanging strategies, but meeting humans had forced them to confront the possibility that their approach might be fundamentally flawed. For immortal beings, the realization that they needed to evolve represented an existential crisis that might take centuries to resolve. In the end, Sarah reflected, humanity had won not through superior technology or military might, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. The aliens had perfected immortality and achieved technological mastery over countless worlds, but they had never learned to outlast an enemy whose greatest strength came from knowing that nothing lasted forever, including the conviction that some challenges were impossible to overcome. The story of Earth's resistance became a new chapter in human history, but more importantly, it became a lesson that spread throughout the galaxy, as other species learned that even immortal conquerors could be defeated by patience, persistence, and the courage to attempt the impossible. The aliens had perfected immortality, but they couldn't outlast human determination to prove that evolution, adaptation, and hope were more powerful than any form of eternal perfection. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.